Do you believe a person can be mentally healthy without also being spiritually healthy? Explain your reasoning behind that, and also if you can define what it means to be spiritually healthy, and what can someone do to nurture their spiritual well-being?
When we look at being mentally healthy, we're looking at resilience. So the protective factors of being mentally healthy is exercise, having a meaning and purpose, having coping strategies, having people you can talk to, and a goal. So within those concepts, when you can express how you feel, it's good because it's coming out of you. When you're able to exercise, let steam, let anger, let stress out of the system, the positive aspect of that is serotonin, endorphins are being pumped around the body. So it's a feel-good factor. We know that. When you go back to childhood, children play and play and play and play. Naturally, they don't want to come home because they're releasing anxiety. Natural phenomena. And so when we keep things in, they fester and they fester and they fester and they fester. It becomes so much. There's an overload because we're running away from something or we don't know how to communicate. And so you're looking at having those sort of resilient aspects of yourself, which we say mentally healthy. So that's a really quick way of looking at it. Some people survive that way. So again, for some people, let's say scientists, when they write books, they're not spiritual, they're not religious, but they always use quotes that are very spiritual. And so, again, it depends on each individual because obviously they're following something within themselves. They're not calling it religious. They're not calling it spiritual. For them, it's normal. So when we look at the concept of transpersonal integrative therapy or psychology, when we're connected within ourselves, it's something that the process goes through across, beyond, and through. And in that, it's something that we're also interconnected with because it goes above, beyond religion, culture, identity, who we are. It's just a connection. So some people may not have a name for that. But again, they're following something within themselves. You can say they're largely happy. Sometimes we don't know the spiritual aspect of that, but if someone's not spiritually connected, what you see between the ages of maybe 50, some people could be 40, 60, 70, there's some sort of crisis where they may have had a wealth. I mentioned about the cancer patients in Holland, which proves that when you're not connecting to who you are, your spiritual well-being degenerates because you could have the wealth, you could buy everything, but you're not happy. Why? And so it impacts people maybe later on from that aspect. Now, the question about spiritual mentality.
Yeah. What does it mean to be spiritually healthy, and what can someone do to nurture their spiritual well-being?
Right. So when we look at society and traveling to the West Indies, Africa, and other Asiatic countries, what I always see and observe, especially those who are in poverty, is the smiles on their faces. And you see that everywhere. I mean, if it's true, Christopher Columbus, when he went to the Americas, what he wrote in his book was they came smiling with big white teeth, the happiness and joy. It'd be easy for us 50 men to wipe them all out. Fact. So when people are born within a system of nature, there's warmth, there's something that within themselves is alive. Children more generally are born happy. So again, that spiritual well-being develops again from the home life or being at home from the cradle of society. Because whatever trauma they go through abuses, everything we have in this country and in the Western countries, so the Western world, that somehow there's a smile on their face. How do you describe that? To someone who has everything, go to good schools, has a good life, yet they're depressed. They're not happy. They go on holidays. And so, in that context, they're connecting to something inside of them, no matter what they're going through. So, you have to look at that question in itself and extrapolate what does it mean to be a spiritual being, because we all are. We all are. Now, when we have an awareness and we don't listen to it, it's going back to now intergenerational trauma, soul trauma, because it's there to help us through pain and suffering, to give us that foundation if our parents can't give us that foundation. And there's a disconnect. It's painful. However, as I mentioned earlier, artists may have people who are expressing that spiritual energy through their music or through their clothes. When I was young, I was depressed. I went to take my life several times. But my essence came out in my colour. It came out maybe in my response to people, the mischievous, the cheeky comment, as a fight. Because the essence wants to emerge and grow and flourish, because we're here as an energy, we have a purpose. So when people don't have a meaning, a purpose or a goal, and they don't know where they're going, you can see that with them spiritually dying, the depression, the anger again. People who abuse or, keep it quiet because that's what I have as an attachment. And so there's an interplay between the both, because if one's following who they are, one suggests that in what they're doing is going to create an energy that's going to bring some form of abundance. But if we're lost, if we're not happy in what we're doing, we may have the understanding, I need X, Y, and Z to get there. And you do it, but you're unhappy, but you do it until there's an eruption. Sometimes it's out of fear of getting there, and I can say that for myself. And so to understand who you are, or to mature or nourish that spiritual well-being, it goes back to, let's say, the resilience model of self-care. To do a little bit of work, a little exercise, journaling, writing, talking, and a bit of stillness in nature, meditation. Because in those processes, there's a balance, there's an alignment. But also being around the right people. Maybe not haven't listened to toxic music, families, systems. But again, there's a sense of attachment. Who am I without them? Or there's a loyalty. So what happens internally, there's a cognitive dissonance because there's a fight. You know what's right, but your personality, what language you formed in those environments, is pulling you back. And so there's a mirror in society that says, if you do X, Y, and Z, something happens. So again, it depends what you believe to what you know is your truth, because everyone's truth's different. Everyone's here for a different experience, different meaning. But working with young children, especially teenagers, they're experienced that mentally they're not well. And in most cases, I think they're quite wise. They're the ones that are different. And there's no understanding from what's around them. And so, again, the work is to name what's there and really work to mirror those aspects of their personality, again, giving them experience of who they are. But it takes time. And so when they begin to experience who they are, their spiritual maturity, well-being changes. A lot of young people now that I've worked with who've attempted suicide, what you see over a period of time, because it's not short-term work, there's a change. But they're reconnecting to who they are. But unfortunately, the parents are unable to do it. So there's a rejection. Why can't they do it? But because their parents haven't been seen. And it doesn't matter what social background or culture group you come from, that is the same experience. So when we look at the soul trauma, I think it's really important to bring it back here because it's both. Culturally, you have people of colour who are not being seen, not being heard, and you have the parents who are adjusting to Western society traditions, which is not where they come from. So those that are born in those countries, especially Africa, you see this joy because that's the cradle of humanity. The Egyptians, the monuments, there's a process. But that process of connecting to your ancestors or who you are has been taken away. And so when we look at spiritual well-being and mental health, and we know statistically with certain culture groups, there's a natural disharmony, mental well-being, because I can't be who I am. And so this is when you look at in the sense of going into crime, lack of education, because I'm not going to be happy there because I'm treated differently. So now it becomes a collective, where it's unconscious and conscious process that mentally I'm not going to be well, spiritually I'm not, because this is how I'm treated. So whatever happens internally, the disempowering or emasculation, especially of men, I can't move outside. Or I'm watched, they think I'm going to steal, or I'm this, I'm that. And so then you've got to look at the collective consciousness of humanity and its message to people like us. Now, the important aspect of Western culture or Caucasian culture, and I come from a very mixed background in that way, or they would say white privilege, but I'm going to use the word intersectionality because my work is to give people the tools to have soul awareness, soul consciousness to make that choice. It's really important, young and old. So at this juncture, if you look at 0 to 7, that's who we're going to be. And if trauma's not worked through, alcohol, addictions, behaviour issues, for everyone, okay? Now, there's something called a doll experiment, which happened in the late 50s, 60s, and again in the 70s and in the 80s, and in 2019, an Italian one. Now, in the doll experiment, you had a black doll, white doll, blue eyes. In all the experiments that have happened, the children of colour have always seen the white doll, blue eyes, as good, positive, perfect. They want to be like them, mainly. And the black doll is negative and bad. Now, if you are able to look at the doll experiment and see the look, especially later on the child's face, of not realising then, but the unconsciousness that they've been programmed, or society, that people of colour are less than. So we have an issue now, fundamentally, spiritually, mentally. So if children from 5 or 6 realize that people who don't look like them are better than them, we go into soul trauma and intergenerational trauma. It's there. It's in the system. Because what we read, what we see says, something in the program, this is it. And so that trauma in sense of music, why isn't it done on X, Y, and Z? Why aren't other people doing the same things about control? So you're going into a system where we become reactive, animalistic, let's use that word, because I'm not going to be seen. That's what it's going to be like. So we perpetuate it, or it's perpetuated. Now, on another level, if we see people of colour unconsciously are seeing Caucasian people as better than less, then what we've got to say unconsciously through epigenetics in the 40s, 50s and 60s in America, white people being programmed to see people of colour as less than, it's going to be very challenged for a person, a white person, white brother and sister, to understand that. Because you've got to work both ways. You can't be one without the other. And so what we're beginning to see in clients, young and old, is this disconnection to your early question about spiritual well-being. It's going to be ineffective and traumatizing because there's going to be a reaction is this can't be true, I'm not doing this. And there's a denial for them to their essence. Now, the reason why I'm making this an important aspect, I'm writing a book at the moment called Integration of Integrity and Integration of Intersectionality, because it's unknown. Now, working with many groups, what we see is, well, our white brothers and sisters have to work on themselves in order to see us. And in many ways, you can say it's true. However, if there's a system that's been built for 400 or 500 years of not seeing us, and we look at the genetic imprint, epigenetics, it's in the system. And if there's no integration or respect for other, we talk about misappropriation, we look at these countries not being able to evolve themselves, it's an epidemic. So to answer that, again, it's about the self of each individual making a conscious effort to go deeper. However, my experience is when I've had people to come in and say, you can't be Gary, you're not Gary. Now, there could be an angle there, but I understand on a spiritual level now. So my mental's gone. That they are where they are, and how I respond to that is either going to alleviate their defense mechanism to sit with it, and I just do what I have to do. And so when you talk about the mental well-being and the spiritual, there's a disconnect, because whoever is guiding that aspect of safety, baby holding, has to have gone there themselves to open up and respond to the negativity. Only truly then you can see the integration of the mental and the spiritual, because in most cases it's split. And the only aspect I would add to this, which is the most important part, if people are spending millions and trillions on personal development, all these spiritual traditions, and in theory, there should be more balanced. So the question is, to answer your original question, there's got to be a fragmentation and a lack of integrity and dishonesty why there's not a sort of healing aspect going on intergenerationally with different cultures. That answers your question.
Yeah, yeah.